Hello and welcome to Miniature Adventures. I'm Big Lee, and this week I want to talk about painting the colour white. So this week I wanted to respond to a topic that came up in conversations I had while I was at Partisan a couple of weeks ago. Unfortunately I neglected to make a note of the names of the people I was chatting to, but twice during the day I ended up having a conversation about how to paint white clothing, belts and other items, and how it can be very challenging to get right. Now I've painted several figures over the years that feature a significant element of white clothing, snow covered bases, fur trim, all that sort of thing, and I'm generally happy with the results that I've achieved. Now I'm not by any stretch of the imagination suggesting my method is a definitive one, but it does summarise my approach to a colour that many painters struggle to paint with. So today I thought I would talk about the chilly subject of painting white. Now, I think many gamers would say that painting with white can be deceptively challenging. It yields stunning results when it's done correctly. Now at first my efforts at painting white miniatures just looked like I'd neglected to cover a section of the primer, leaving me rather puzzled as how to get it right. And white, despite its simplicity, requires just as much attention as any other colour, in some ways perhaps more. And now the key lies in mastering the interplay of shadows and highlights. And in painting white, the shadows are crucial as they define the form and give depth to the highlights. Without this balance, the miniature can appear flat or unfinished. Now I think the first thing that you have to consider is what type of white you want to achieve, cold or warm. Now this might sound unusual, but white has subtle variations depending on the surrounding colours and the base tones that you use. So for a cold white you want a hint of grey in the shadows. One excellent option is Vallejo's Wolf Grey, for instance, from their game colour range, which has a slight blue tint to it. This touch of blue gives the miniature a cold, clean appearance. Alternatively, you can use something like Stonewall Grey, which is a more neutral but still effective for cold whites. For a warm white, opt for a shadow tone with hints of yellow or brown in it. So stay away from red hues, as these can overpower the white and alter the overall look too drastically. You don't want pink webbing on your Napoleonic figures, for instance. A subtle brown like Vallejo's Brown Sand works well when providing a soft, warm shadow to white highlights. And this creates a sense of warmth without shifting the focus away from the white itself. Now some painters recommend beginning with the darker shade colour and gradually layering up towards the highlights. However, in my experience, this can ultimately dull the final effect. If you're aiming for bright, striking white highlights, it's essential to start with what I think is essential to start with a white undercoat. Now Vallejo's white primer is excellent for this purpose as it provides solid and even white across the area that you're painting. I mean, even if you're painting over a black undercoat, if the rest of the model is black, for the rest of the model, Vallejo's primer can cover the white areas effectively without obscuring any of the fine details on the miniature. I mean, there are other ranges, but this is the range that I use. Now having a strong white base coat also gives you more control over how you build up the shadows and highlights, allowing more vibrant and defined contrasts. And this base also ensures that your highlights will shine through, making the finished product look crisp and clean. Now once the base coat is in place, it's time to start working on the shadows, and here the goal is to emphasise the areas where light naturally wouldn't hit, like deep folds, crevices and areas under arms or cloaks. These shadows are critical because they frame the white and give it dimension. To create effective shadows, I usually mix a wash using the chosen shadow colour. Now my preferred mix used to be a blend of paint to 4 parts water, but over the years I've started to replace some of that water with medium thinner instead. Now the thinner prevents the wash from pooling in unwanted areas and helps avoid uneven blotches. But every painter's going to have their own method. When applying the wash that I use now, I work slowly and sparingly, allowing the wash to settle in the recesses over multiple thin layers. And the beauty of using a wash in this way is it allows you to gradually build up the shadow intensity, adjusting it as needed. Now for areas with deeper shadows, such as underarms or folds in a cloak, additional layers can be applied to darken the shadow and create a more dramatic contrast. An important aspect of painting white is feathering that wash upwards towards the highlights. Now, feathering allows for a smoother transition between shadows and light areas, preventing any harsh lines and enhancing the sense of depth in a miniature. That being said, I would define feathering as an advanced technique, and if your aim is to get miniatures on the games table rather than winning painting competitions, you may prefer to skip this stage and go for a simpler method. So with the shadows completed to your preference, it's time to address the highlights. Now, highlighting white can be the trickiest part of the process, but it's also where the final effect truly comes to life. If you want a slightly dirty, worn white, keep the highlights just a shade of pure white, except for the most extreme areas where light would naturally hit, such as raised edges for instance. But if you're going for a clean, sharp white, the highest highlights should be solid, pure white. Dry brushing is an excellent way to quickly and effectively apply highlights to raised areas, especially if you're painting lots of figures for wargaming for instance. However, for a cleaner look and better quality results, you will need to switch to a fine detail brush. This allows for great precision, especially in smaller, more intricate areas. Now, I dilute pure white highlights paint, again 1:1 ratio with medium thinner, which retains the opacity of the paint but allows it to flow more easily, giving greater precision. But with this thinner consistency, it's important not to overload the brush, which can cause the paint to flood into the shadows, ruining all your earlier work. Now, by applying several thin layers of paint, you can build up the highlights gradually to a brilliant white. And this layered approach ensures that the highlights are clean and vibrant, making the contrast between the light and the dark areas stand out even more. Now, it's also worth adding that if you like using a wash like quick shade to add quick shadows to a figure, you can still return to the white areas and apply this layered white highlight where needed, when the wash has dried, because obviously sometimes you put a wash on, it can dull all the colours down and give them a bit of a tint. So go back to your white areas or the biggest highlights on all over your model in fact, and just reapply those to boost that colour again. Now, for many beginners, white, along with yellow, is considered one of the most difficult colours to master. It can be unforgiving because any mistake, such as a shadow that's too dark or a highlight that's too thick, will be highly visible. However, with patience and the right techniques, painting with white can become less intimidating. Now, the key is to embrace bold contrasts with subtle dark shadows to make the highlights pop a bit more. At least that's what I think about it. By carefully controlling the application of shadows and highlights, you can create a visually striking miniature that stands out on the table. In summary, painting white requires careful planning, precise application of washes and highlights, and a willingness to experiment with contrast. But this is just my way of tackling white, and as I said in my intro, I'm not claiming to be the best method. So, I'm not a competition painter, I'm painting for models on the table. But when you're painting figures that have a significant element of white, you really need them to work really well. So do you have any suggestions or alternative techniques for getting the best out of a tricky colour like white? As always, I'd love to hear what you think in the comments below. So time for a hobby update. Now this week I've been trying to make some time to read rules. In particular, I'm looking at Sharp Practice 2. Now I bought this set of rules back at Partisan earlier in the year and I've only just really got around to diving into them. I did get a taster game of Sharp Practice at a Lardy Games Day hosted by the South London Warlords back in May, I think it was. Despite being on the losing side of my game, I rather enjoyed the set of rules. So I'm trying to get through the rules now. My concentration in reading rules is notorious, I promise you, and give it some thought as to what period I want to use them with. And maybe I'll do a short review on them at a later date. So a Workbench update, I'm still not really getting any painting done. Instead I'm concentrating purely on priming figures well in advance of the painting challenge, which starts in December. Now I doubt if I'll get everything that I've primed finished during the competition, but I'm actually finding the process of cleaning and priming figures very therapeutic, so I'm happy with my apparent lack of progress at the moment. I have, however, been making some test bases for upcoming projects. Now, this is where I try out different colour schemes and basing styles before committing to any one choice. And it does mean that when I start painting figures, I can quickly base the figures because I've already made those decisions about what I want the basing scheme to look like. I ain't got to worry about making a dreadful and permanent mistake after having spent time painting figures. So that's it for this week, another short-ish video. Please join the conversation in the comments below if you've found today's subject interesting. And of course, if you did enjoy the video, please like, subscribe and share. And if you want to keep up to date with weekly content from the channel, please tap the bell notification icon. So until next week, stay safe, keep gaming and of course, keep rolling high.